I just opened up our stream on Zoom, so we have some attendees joining us. Thank you, everybody. Hope I see it. All right. There's more coming in. Here. I think by the time we do this last one, I am going to have like music playing in the background. So during this little wait time. Just elevator music. I mean, we've got tons of copyright-free instrumental things we can play. Okay. All right. All right,
And Sheila, you don't want to be on mute, I don't think.
It's 2:01, so I'm gonna get us started. Welcome everyone to our fourth webinar as part of our AEA Supporting Online Learning webinar series. My name is Stacy Beamer. I'm the coordinator of digital learning and media services over at Grantwood AEA out of the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area. And I'm super excited to have Jamie Randall and Sheila. If I mispronounced your last name, I should ask. Is it Waylander?
It's Welander.
Welander, with us today to talk about creating emotionally and intellectually safe online learning environments, which is so important right now. So I just want to remind everyone at the end, we are recording this. We have people joining us via Zoom, and we have folks joining us on Facebook. So if you have any questions, if you are viewing this on Facebook Live, go ahead and put those in the comments, and we'll get to some points throughout the presentation that will pause and address these questions. And if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A here. All the links, EC just beat me to the punch. All of the links, resources we will be sharing with you as we go, but they're also on the landing page where you signed up for this. So all the recordings for all of the sessions and all of the resources that we talk about will be linked there for you. So as we go, I will be throwing some links in the chat and into the comment section on Facebook. Oh, that's okay. I'm glad people are excited to be here. Somebody just said there, apologize for asking and jumping the gun. Not a big deal. So without any further ado, Jamie and Sheila, I'm going to have you introduce yourselves and begin to share.
Hi, everyone. I am Jamie Randall, the coaching coordinator at Prairie Lakes AEA, and I work a lot with teacher leadership.
And my name is Sheila Welander, and I am in my third year as an induction coach for South Central Calhoun and East County School Districts. And before that, I was 18 years as an English reading teacher at South Central Calhoun.
Oopsie. Okay, everyone. I would like to invite you to take just about 30 seconds and think about and make a mental note or jot down 2 to 3 practices that you already do to create an emotionally and intellectually safe learning environment for students. So as we move through this presentation today at a pretty perky pace, please keep those practices in mind and how you might use what you hear about today in a virtual environment. Today, our intent is to share some low effort and low tech practices that you can use tomorrow to create optimal learning conditions for students, both in the classroom and in a virtual environment, that also support the social and emotional learning needs of students. Today, several technology tools are mentioned that can support practice or the strategies that we share. If you want to know more about the actual technology tool, please reach out to your AEA technology staff or your district technology integrationist. Today, we're sharing 3 resources with you. The first is the Optimal Learning Environment Framework. The second is a supplemental document that goes along with the Optimal Learning Environment Framework. This document was developed jointly by staff from Dubuque Community School District in Iowa and the New Teacher Center. And these 2 resources are both free resources for your use. The third resource includes low effort and low tech practices for you to consider in creating emotionally and intellectually safe conditions for students in a virtual environment. I will first share a little information about each resource, and then we'll get into the low effort and low tech practices that we would like for you to consider. The first resource, the Optimal Learning Environment, consists of 14 classroom practices that are categorized into 3 domains. And the domain that we're focusing on today is creating emotionally, intellectually, and physically safe environments. There are 2 other domains that have great practices in them, and they are equitable, culturally responsive, and standards-aligned curriculum and instruction, and practices for meeting the diverse learning needs of learners. So I encourage you to take a look at this document after the presentation. The practices in the optimal learning environment help teachers to create equity for students as well as support students with developing Iowa's social and emotional competencies. Today, we're focusing on the domain, create emotionally, intellectually, and physically safe environments. And as I share each of the practices with you, I want you to think through the lens of, I do this practice pretty well, I could do this practice better, or I am curious as to how to do this in a virtual environment.
So today we're going to read the first one, create emotionally, intellectually, and physically safe environments. Create positive relationships that are kind, caring, and respectful. Nurture self-awareness, identity development, and sense of purpose. Emphasize effort-supported risk-taking and strategies for academic, social, and emotional growth. Support safe and engaged interactions with co-created procedures, routines, and classroom design. And also encourage developmentally appropriate and culturally relevant strategies for expressions of emotions and conflict resolution.
So these will be the 5 that we focus on today. So you might just be thinking about these in terms of what you do pretty well already, what you could be better at, and if you're just curious about how this looks in a virtual environment. As you go through the school year, you might also consider asking your students how well you are doing these practices for them. So again, before we dig into the practices, the second document that we're sharing with you today was developed jointly by staff from Dubuque Community School District in Iowa and the New Teacher Center. And this resource provides additional information about the 14 practices. It talks about what the practice is. It gives a little bit of information about why the practice is important for students. And then it provides examples of what it looks and sounds like in the classroom. The document that we're working with today, and you can make a copy of this, you'll be forced to make a copy of this, if you want to take notes and do any sort of application as we go through the presentation. This resource was developed by Prairie Lakes AEA, and it lists the practice in purple font, and then it just provides a short why it's important. And then it provides 3 examples of what it looks like in the classroom. And for each of those examples, there's corresponding strategies for how this can be done in the virtual classroom. What we're sharing is not an all-inclusive list. And with some thought, you could adapt the strategies for different grade levels and content areas. After we have gone over some strategies for each of the practices, we'll give you a minute or so to just think about how you might apply that to your practice. And at that time, maybe address questions that are in the chat box. So I'm going to have Sheila start with sharing the first practice.
The first practice is to create positive relationships that are kind, caring, and respectful. And this is important because when students and teachers connect in kind, caring, and respectful ways, they learn to develop trust that supports the learning process. And it's also important because positive relationships, they signal social and emotional safety as students take part in challenging work and strive towards those shared goals.
So this is an example of how this looks in a virtual environment. As students join the Zoom or Google Meet, the teacher says hello to each student by name. The second strategy is the teacher puts students in breakout groups with 3 students per room. Students are asked to find a picture on their phone or internet and share why the picture is important to them. Using these pictures will help students remember the get to know you information about their peers, because images support long-term retention of information. A second strategy for creating positive relationships that are kind, caring, and respectful is to have students individually read, think, and write about some content. When students are in the breakout room, they use a round-robin strategy for each one to share a response to the question about what they read. They are told how much time they each get to share their response, such as 60 seconds. There are links to free ideas for protocols in the Prairie Lakes AEA document that was shared with you. This is just a sampling of some of those protocols that are in that link. And although the protocols are mainly for adult learning, they can easily be adapted to use with students in your context. I find that using these protocols really gives me good ideas to use, and it really helps to not have to develop them from scratch. The third strategy for creating positive relationships that are kind, caring, and respectful is for students to have norms and to have different roles when they are in breakout rooms. The roles might include process observer, timekeeper, note taker, and facilitator. So the strategy is to have the teacher has the students co-create 3 ways to remind each other in a really respectful ways to follow the norms during breakout rooms. For example, the student playing the role of observer says, "I notice we are not all following the protocol the teacher gave us." Having students co-create builds a sense of accountability among the students that also builds a sense of belonging and community. So go ahead and just take a couple of minutes to think about how you might apply any of those low effort, low tech ways for caring and positive relationships.
Okay, one of the questions was about Google Meet, including breakout rooms. And currently, could not attend a webinar yesterday, but there was a webinar yesterday that I need to get caught up on, but Google Meet will have breakout rooms coming. It will also have the ability to blur your background. So thinking about kiddos that are at home. So that feature will be coming if you want to blur out backgrounds. And then a couple other features. So it will have, if they do talk about throughout this webinar, some application of Zoom, those features will be a part of Google Meet in hopefully by the end of the month. I haven't heard an exact date yet. So just to answer that question, if there are any other questions right now, feel free to throw them in the Q&A or in the comments on Facebook, and we'll ask Jamie and Sheila.
Okay, I think we'll go on to the second practice.
The second practice is to nurture self-awareness, identity development, and a sense of purpose. And we know this is important because the sociocultural nature of learning can have significant impacts on individual success. It's important because identifying how we think, what we feel, how we act, and what we are good at gives us new perspectives on how we relate to others and how we approach challenges of all kinds.
This might be, oh, go ahead, Sheila.
I was just going to say, this might be one that some of you marked as being curious about, or that you would like to do better. You might be curious about what is meant by self-awareness and identity. There are definitions for both self-awareness and identify on the backside of the optimal learning environment resource that you receive at the end of the presentation. And then Jamie's going to kind of talk more about that as we get farther into the webinar.
So the first strategy for nurture self-awareness, identity development, and sense of purpose for students is pretty much like what you probably already do as a teacher, and now you need to be assured that can also happen in a virtual environment using available technology like Google Draw, Sketchbook, or Doodle Buddy. So while students are in the main room, the teacher introduces a new subject and asks the students to make pictures or maps of what they already have seen, heard, or read about the subject. Students do this on a piece of paper using pen or pencil and other colors, and they could also use Google Draw, Sketchbook, or Doodle Buddy. After the students have had time to think and do, the teacher has students share the information they already know as a formative assessment. So formative assessment not only honors what students already know, it also supports students becoming self-aware. Now there's a whole lot more to student self-awareness. However, in this example, it would be helping students be aware that they already know something about the subject, and this helps them to be intellectually safe. The second strategy for nurturing self-awareness, identity development, and a sense of purpose, and builds upon the definition of self-awareness, which is a sense of knowing and understanding what one is experiencing, including feelings, thoughts, needs, behaviors, values, judgments, and biases. So in this case, we know that it's really important for students to do reflective self-evaluation on every piece of important student work. So questions like these on the slide help students know what they are good at and to think about how to persist with challenging tasks. So the teacher could use a Google form to collect student emails and responses to the questions. So what did I learn from reviewing my work? What helped me learn? How much effort did I put into my learning? And what will I do going forward to be a good learner and produce quality work? The Google form is set so that students receive a copy of their responses that they can review later in order to set goals and reflect on their progress over time. Students could also use Flipgrid to record responses to the same questions rather than write responses. The third strategy addresses the importance of questions that teachers ask, how they ask them, and who they ask them of, making it really clear to all students that they each have something important to contribute. So the teacher poses several higher order thinking questions for students to choose 3 from, and then think and write responses in a Google Doc, or think and record responses in Flipgrid. Students are randomly paired and put in breakout rooms to share the questions they chose and their responses. Together, the pair develops a new response for each question they chose. Each pair chooses 1 question and response to share with other students in the main room. This shows respect for all perspectives and supports equity of voice. So go ahead and take a minute or so to think about how you might apply any of those ideas to your classroom practices for your students. And Stacy or Sheila we can address some questions if there are any.
One of the questions that came up about Flipgrid and is it safe to use online? And yes, I feel really confident about Flipgrid. It is a Microsoft product, and they use secure encryption, and they have designed it specifically for education. So they have taken in account terms of service and all of that for using with students. And I'm so sorry, the compliance, COPA, SIPA, like HIPAA, those kind of things, not HIPAA, but COPA and SIPA. So it meets those guidelines. So I feel very comfortable recommending Flipgrid to use with students. Sorry, I didn't, Jamie, Sheila, I could let you answer that.
Any others? And we like you taking those technology questions, Stacy. That's why I'm doing low tech.
Okay. There's a comment in the chat that just says we really have to work with students being okay with their images on Flipgrid. My students did not like to put their cameras on, and that's from Jennifer. You guys want to talk about that at all, or do you want me to address that?
Go ahead.
Sure. So I think a good digital citizenship is something to talk about too as you're using some of these tools. There's a lot of good digital citizenship resources out there. Common Sense Media has a plethora. That's where I would send people to get started. But yeah, having that conversation about sharing your face on the camera. I know different ages are very different. So what's age appropriate, and also thinking about, how do you get to know somebody? Having that conversation. If right now, if we all shut our cameras off and we were talking and presenting, it's going to be a little bit different of an interpretation than if you couldn't see our faces. So the cues that you get, and it's kind of like talking about if I'm just answering in text versus if I'm answering face to face and you can see my reaction. So seeing somebody's face, even though your hair isn't perfect, just being able to see your facial expressions and helps enhance the message that you're trying to get across.
And I think that goes back to the earlier strategy we shared too, so that students are comfortable with each other, is having them share information, like a picture or something important to them, and just having some of those conversations get to know you up front. And sometimes, that doesn't just have to be like icebreakers or I'm just going to get to know you. They can share information about themselves with others and do something about content at the same time. Okay, how about the third practice, Sheila?
Yeah, the third practice for creating emotionally and intellectually and safe physical environments is to emphasize effort, supported risk-taking, and strategies for academic, social, and emotional growth. And it's important because a balanced approach to requiring rigor, that's that academic press that we talk about, while also providing adequate supports in the context of a caring relationship, has been shown to boost student agency in terms of commitment to learning, effort, and future orientation. And remember, student agency is about empowering students to take active ownership of their learning, building on the strengths that they already have while identifying their gaps and believing that change can occur with deliberate action. This involves self-awareness and choice and voice to engage in critical thinking and learning.
So in this example, students have choice. Students choose to read, view a video, or listen to a TED Talk about a specific subject and develop responses to a set of focused questions sequenced from recall questions to higher order thinking questions. Students choose the format they want to use for responding, such as drawing, writing, podcast, or storytelling. The teacher groups the students in triads, one who read, one who viewed, and one who listened, to share their responses in a breakout room. The teacher then does direct instruction in the main room about the key ideas and concepts the students should have constructed from the task. The three choices given to students provided multiple pathways for students to learn the content. And this leverages different learning needs and supports students with their social and emotional learning needs. This strategy is about using teacher language to promote a growth mindset by praising and reinforcing student effort. So after a quiz, while the students are in the main room, students talk through various approaches to the questions that vex them. As the teacher listens to students, the teacher praises students for their approaches, how they processed information, and conveys interest in what students try to do when tackling challenges. The idea is to be intentional about praising and reinforcing student effort because it boosts students' commitment to learning. It also serves as a formative assessment for the teacher to hear how students approach the problems and arrived at their answers. In this last example of teachers emphasizing effort, supported risk-taking, and using strategies for academic, social, and emotional growth, the teacher chunks a difficult task into smaller parts using Google Docs to list the chunks and directions. Students are strategically put in breakout groups based on their strengths and growth areas so that student variability enhances the collaboration and learning of students. The students meet in breakout rooms to work on each chunk. When students return to the main room, the group reporter shares the group's learnings and questions. This is an example of how to sustain student effort and reduce frustration at the same time. So go ahead and take a minute or so, think about how you might apply any of those strategies or practices, and we can see if there's any questions or comments that we need to address.
So Jamie, when you talked about, I just want to expand a little bit more with an example. So if I am a 5th grade teacher, middle school teacher, ELA classroom, and students are consuming content in a different way, and then they come together, do you give them free choice on how to, if they want to listen to it, read it, or watch a video? Do they self-select that, or do you assign that?
They would self-select.
It's self-select.
Yeah, but you would, if you're going to do the triad work, you'd want to make sure that all of those are being selected.
Okay.
But you want to give the students as much choice as possible. Okay. But teachers also know their students, and they might suggest to certain students, you might want to try this, just because they know that that might help them learn better.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be 3 choices. That example could have been very good for like secondary, but with like elementary students, maybe they're not going to listen to a TED Talk, but they could view a video or read, and at least have 2 choices to the same content.
And they're going to adapt. So recognizing their own learning styles too, and how they learn best. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's. And I think
that's part of them becoming self-aware also. Yeah.
Well, and then as you were talking too, it really struck me. Sorry, I'm just commenting that. Then they can go out, actually produce something, and as you said, create a podcast. They could do that on their own and demonstrate their knowledge, and that's going to improve engagement as well. So this good stuff.
Yeah.
I don't have any other questions in the chat or in the comment.
Okay. Well, and it's also important too that just like teachers would be putting students in groups, maybe in the classroom, using the breakout feature still allows students to have that autonomy and to hear their voice, because we want them thinking and reading and writing and speaking, but then we want them sharing that information because the power comes from them learning from each other also. Okay, next practice.
The 4th practice is to support safe and engaged interactions with co-created procedures, routines, and classroom design. And we know this is important because orderly procedures and cognitive routines can support equitable opportunities for learners who vary in countless ways and create safe spaces for them to learn and interact with others. It's important to accomplish this, and they agree on specific protocols that clarify and deepen their work together, while also supporting their diverse perspectives and their own individual learning needs.
So this example emphasizes the need to involve students in creating class norms, expectations, and procedures with the teacher. So the teacher provides students with 2 or 3 non-negotiable norms, such as mute your mic when others are talking, have your camera on, and use the step away icon as needed. And the teacher explains why these norms are important. The teacher then provides students with a list of additional norms to consider that they adapt or adopt for the class. The students self-assess and assess their peers' adherence to the norms once every week. Google Form or Flipgrid can be used by students to track their self-assessments over time. So co-creation of and adherence to norms not only supports intellectual safety, but also equity among students. In the classroom, students should have frequent opportunities to get out of their seats to engage in learning activities and rituals that involve movement, music, or making things that are designed to ignite their spirits and emotions. This is just one example of how this could look in a virtual environment. At least every 30 minutes, the teacher provides an opportunity for students to engage in movement. Students take turns selecting the type of movement. So examples might be walk 2 laps around the table, 10 jumping jacks, stretch, or dance. The teacher can use Google Play Music to play music during student movement, and Go Noodle can be used to display a video for students to follow along. For elementary students, the teacher can launch Go Noodle and display a video on the screen so that students can follow that along for a brain break. That is really important because movement gets oxygen to the brain and it supports cognition. In this example of teachers supporting safe and engaged interactions through orderly procedures and cognitive routines, the teacher provides a checklist of supports that students can choose options that meet their needs. So this is giving information to the teacher about what they need. The supports should reflect what students might need for success in the virtual environment. And then the teacher needs to be intentional about embedding these needed supports in the design of lessons. So of the examples shared so far, intentional planning is a lot more effort. It isn't low effort. And so I would really encourage you to work with your instructional coaches as you design those lessons and embed the needed supports for students. So we can just take another minute or so to apply any of those examples to your classroom practices, and we can address any questions or comments.
Jamie and Sheila are mentioning some resources here. One of Jackie Hawley just made a comment too. She said, you know, you might need to modify your movement for social distancing regulations right now. And so very true. So thinking about how do you mark off your classroom where your kids can be, especially for some of those brain breaks. But if you're using tools like GoNoodle or any of those websites or tools that she's mentioning, and you don't know about them, contact a consultant at your agency. They can help support you getting started with some of these. So if you've never used Flipgrid or some of those kind of things. Lisa also commented on Facebook that capturing kids' hearts is a great model to create collaborative class norms as you're doing things. So yeah, a lot of connections here with folks as we get going. Another question is about, do you guys have a place where you would recommend getting podcasts? So I just threw in the chat, and I will throw it into Facebook too. Jonathan Wiley, who's on my team, did a blog post about where to, like, just some of the best podcasts for kids. So I just linked that in the chat. And yes, NOR TED Talks have great podcasts too for all ages. I would reach NPR. Okay, I'm like NOR. Okay, yes, NPR. That makes sense. And then they can subscribe. There's different ways to subscribe depending on your device. Thanks, Jennifer. Okay.
Well, and people have probably picked up on that this presentation is really about practices that create emotionally and intellectually safe environments. And those same practices that work in a classroom can work in a virtual environment and supported with technology. But these are really low effort, low tech ideas, but the technology that is mentioned as we go along, like you said, Stacy, the technology consultants at the AEA, or if a district has a technology integrationist, that's who can help them actually use the technology tool to bring that practice to students.
The last practice is to encourage developmentally appropriate and culturally relevant strategies for expression of emotion and conflict resolution. And we want to do this because with articulated expectations and procedures that encourage respect and rapport, listening, perspective taking, and inclusion, and opportunities for guided practice, students feel that their voices are heard and they benefit from a sense of belonging to the learning community, both emotionally and academically.
So this is how the last practice plays out in a virtual environment. The teacher poses several higher order thinking questions for students to choose 3 from and write 3 responses. Students are randomly paired and put in breakout rooms to share their questions and responses, and then together develop a new response for each question they chose. Each pair chooses 1 question and response to share with other students in the main room. This provides a safe method for lifting the cognition of every student and for equity of voice. Expanding on that example, The teacher reminds students about the sentence stems that were provided for them to use in guiding their discussions. The teacher shows the questions on the PowerPoint or where they can be found in Google Classroom. The teacher stresses that the sentence stems provide a cognitive procedure for students to show respect. Students are expected to use the sentence stems while processing the responses to the questions and in developing a new response to share out in the main room. Continuing with that example, the students reflect in their individual Google Doc journal about their experience, positive and negative. And that experience was the one in the breakout room where they were having to use sentence stems to process higher order thinking questions. The teacher reviews the journals as a formative assessment and provides feedback to students about their social, emotional, and academic learning. The teacher can provide written statements or verbal comments using Read and Write extension for Google Chrome or Kaizen. So besides being the reflection being a formative assessment, it's also good for students to reflect because one can learn from experience, but it is the conscious reflection upon the experience that deepens their learning. So go ahead and take a minute or so to think about how you might apply the practice and the strategies to your classroom practices. And we can take some more questions or comments.
One of the things I like about thinking about the reflection and for kids, like just the metacognition of it all. And I love like Read and Write and Kaizen are good tools, but also thinking kind of outside the box. If you use any screencasting tools, one of the things you can do with like Screencastify, which is free, students could have on their screen their work and they could narrate through and then turn that into Google Classroom or put it into Google Drive too. So there's a lot of creative tools out there that you could use to have kids share what they were thinking. And Seesaw, those of you who are Seesaw users for elementary too, that's got a great portfolio tool where kids can just even take a quick video explaining what they're doing. Love it.
Okay. So at the start of the session, you were invited to think about what you already know and do about creating emotionally and intellectually safe environments for students. Our intent today was to really just demonstrate some low effort and low tech practices that you can use tomorrow to create those optimal learning conditions for students that also support their social and emotional learning needs. Again, the actual technology that was mentioned, your AEA consultant or your technology integrationist can help with that. And the 3 resources that were shared with you today are free for your use. I really encourage you to look at all those practices in the optimal learning environment with the supplemental document, because those are the kinds of practices that really get at student social emotional learning. And Sheila and I would just like to thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Sheila, for sharing with us today. This is good stuff. And like you said earlier too, this can be great in an online environment, but also many of these are just good strategies we can use in our everyday classroom when we're in a normal situation face-to-face. So just the way we go about doing it might just look a little bit different. Some of the strategies were specific to Zoom and Google Meet, to some of those online things in an online environment, like in a synchronous online environment. So we are talking more specifically about Zoom and Meet in our next session. So how do you use those breakout rooms, and the kind of the nuts and bolts of that. We also offered a session on Google Classroom and Seesaw, and thinking about how we can use those tools maybe and some of these strategies in an asynchronous manner as well. So how are you using your home base or your learning management system to help engage kids? And we have an engagement session coming up. So if you go to this bit.ly/AEA webinar series, that's just going to take you to the page where you read the descriptions and have the titles for the webinars. On that page, we will put a link to the recording for this webinar and all of the others. It's going to take a couple days, but we will get those posted with all of the great resources that are being shared. Again, as Jamie said, we at the AEAs are here to help support and reach out to your instructional coaches or your tech coaches, or the AEA instructional technology consultants or digital learning consultants, whatever they might be called at your AEA. Thank you guys for presenting, Jamie and Sheila, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.